Hey guys, and welcome back to the YouTube channel. So today, as you can see by the title, we have got how I gained 20 pounds of muscle naturally. So over the last 4 years, since 2019, I've pretty much gone from 135 pounds in 2019 and currently I'm 152 pounds. But as you can see by these pictures, I'm definitely leaner now. So I think there's around 20 pounds of lean mass there. And I think I can give quite a lot of value as to how I've done that over the last 4 years and my approach to gaining that muscle, and hopefully help some of you guys out. So I've gone over this in the past, but I started training in 2016 and I was around 125 pounds, but skinny fat basically. And by 2019, I was 135 pounds. I was lean, but because I didn't have any muscle, it didn't really show that well in terms of conditioning. At that point, I kind of realized that I needed to put on a lot more muscle. So I really focused on staying in a surplus for as long as possible over the last 4 years. So over that 4 years, from 2019 to 2023, I was basically doing gaining phases and cutting phases, and that pushed me all the way up to 186. And then I started my prep in 2022. I'm currently 11 weeks out and I'm around 152 pounds right now. So that gives you some context as to what my journey was like. So I'm going to split this video up into 5 different sections. We're firstly going to go through creating a plan of action for the period of time going forward. We'll then talk about mindset towards gaining muscle and therefore being in a surplus and gaining body fat at the same time. I'm then going to go through how my training, nutrition and recovery all changed over those 4 years to try and maximise the amount of muscle I was gaining. So in terms of setting up a plan going forward, I think it's very important to basically stay in a surplus for as long as possible when you're trying to gain a good amount of muscle. So for that, you really need to be at a good starting point from a body composition standpoint. So I started from a very lean starting point and therefore I had a really long runway for progression going forward. So preferably what you do is stay in a surplus for as long as possible without any dieting phases in between there. And that will basically just allow you to maximize growth because you're in that anabolic environment of having more energy coming in than going out, and therefore you're more likely to progress in the gym and therefore you're more likely to grow muscle. So I think having a starting point at a pretty lean body composition is important. That just allows you to have this long runway ahead of you without even having to think about dieting basically. So if you're not in a good starting point to set up a long-term surplus, I'd probably do a small diet before you go into it, and therefore you're giving yourself more room to play with regards to gaining body fat. To be honest, if I went back and did these 4 years again, I wouldn't have dieted as often as I did. So over this 4 years, I basically did one diet a year. So I did a diet in 2020, a diet in 2021 and a diet in 2022. And preferably what I would have done is basically just have a smaller surplus and therefore stayed in a surplus for all of that time rather than having to basically get to a high body fat level and then cutting back down and doing that again and again and cycling around that way. What I'd rather do, just stay in a surplus for that whole 3 years. That would have been way better because I wouldn't have lost the momentum of gaining and therefore progression in the gym if I hadn't have done those diets in between. So preferably, if you can stay in a surplus for a longer amount of time, your gaining phase is probably going to be more effective. I think also looking at your physique at the start of gaining phase and trying to basically analyze your physique and pick out your strong and weak points is pretty important to do, especially if you're an advanced lifter, because you're probably not going to grow as effectively if you can't prioritize certain body parts when you're an advanced trainer. But to be honest, for most people, and for me at the time, I didn't need to grow any specific muscle group because I needed more muscle everywhere. Therefore, I just built a balanced program going forward and therefore grew everywhere. But if you are an advanced lifter who has a glaring weak point, then it could be useful to basically analyze your physique, realize what your weak points are, and then prioritize them in the push-up phase. In terms of what body weight you want to be hitting over the gaining phase, what I would say is you want to be pushing to a body weight range in which performance is optimized. So this could be a pretty big range for most people. So for me, my performance is really good, anywhere from around 160 pounds all the way up to 185. So basically what I would recommend is pushing as high as you can without seeing negative feedback such as reductions in sleep, really poor appetite, potentially recovery is getting worse as well. If you start seeing that negative feedback, then that's probably a sign that you pushed too far and therefore need to pull back a little bit. Also, with regards to pushing body weight, you need to understand your own ability to pull that body weight off. So for me, I know I can diet very easily and I can pull the weight off if I need to. So I didn't mind pushing a bit harder and pushing to a bit of a higher body fat level because I wanted to eke out as much muscle gain as possible. And I knew that I could easily pull off 20 pounds within 6 weeks if I really wanted to. And therefore, it wasn't really a risk for me pushing that high. For other people who really struggle in dieting phases, I wouldn't push them quite as high because therefore they're not going to be able to get back down as easily. And you're probably going to have to end up dieting for a longer amount of time if you're pushing those people to high body weights basically. So that's body weight covered. In terms of rate of gain, I think the main thing to note here is the amount you want to be gaining each week really depends on your body composition and really depends on how your training performance is going as well. So when you're at the start of a gaining phase and you're a bit leaner and therefore have less energy basically stored to your body as body fat, you're probably going to require a bit of a bigger surplus to make sure that progression's in a good spot. So maybe between 0.5 and 1 pound per week. I'd then look at your composition and your training performance as you're pushing up, and then you can adjust the rate of gain depending on that. If you're gaining body fat a bit too quickly, then I'd probably slow down the rate of gain. And maybe if progression's a little bit too too slow, you might want to speed up the rate of gain very slightly. Later on in a gaining phase, when your body fat levels are a little bit higher, you can probably afford with gaining at a bit of a slower rate, just because you have so much energy availability attached to your body that you don't need that big surplus to continue to progress within the gym. So even towards the end of a gaining phase, you might be gaining at between 0.2 and 0.3 pounds per week. But if you're still progressing in the gym and you're maintaining your execution over time, then that means you're going to be gaining muscle over time. So I wouldn't worry too much towards the end of a gaining phase about having these big jumps in weight every single week. I'd look at it on more of a monthly basis. In summary, I'd probably go with a quicker rate of gain at the start of the gaining phase and then slow that down over time towards the end of the gaining phase, where progression is going to be really easy anyway without gaining weight really quickly. So that's how I'd approach planning a gaining phase. The next section I want to talk about is your mindset in a gaining phase. I think this is one of the most overlooked variables when it comes to bodybuilding and physique development, because if your mindset isn't in a good spot, you're not going to be able to be adherent to your nutrition and training. You're going to struggle with consistency, and then also you're going to struggle with confidence within the gym, and therefore you're probably not going to make as much progress as you could if your mindset wasn't in a good spot. The first thing I want to speak about is your actions need to reflect your goals. So depending on what your goals are, your actions need to reflect that. You can't be expecting A-star level results with D-level effort and consistency. So that's very important when you're looking at gaining muscle. You want your actions to reflect your goals. If you have the goal of gaining 20 pounds of muscle, but you don't have particularly great genetics for building muscle, you're gonna have to put more effort in than other people to make sure you can do that. This doesn't mean that you have to be 100% in all of the time and never going off plan. You can still stay balanced and be 100% optimal. For example, in my gaining phase, there were plenty of times where I went off plan, had a different meal compared to my meal plan, went out for a drink. There were plenty of times that I did that, but I planned ahead and made sure I was staying on track while having those occasions as well. So there's no reason why you can't continue to be adherent and consistent with your training and nutrition while also staying balanced with your social life as well. I think a lot of the time, people just make the excuse that their nutrition and training is taken away from their social life, when they could really just work around it and make them both work at the same time. So make sure your actions are reflecting your goals, and if you want to see the best results, then you're basically going to have to put a lot of effort in. Another thing that people struggle with a lot is body image during a gaining phase. So obviously if you're staying in the surplus for a long amount of time, you're going to be gaining body fat at some point. Even if it's a small amount, over time your body composition is going to be getting slightly softer, and therefore it can have quite a big impact on your body image and your confidence within your physique as well. It can be quite difficult to commit to a gaining phase when you're not really seeing any progress, because obviously if you're gaining fat as you're gaining muscle, that new muscle tissue is probably going to be hidden a little bit more, and therefore it might not look like you're gaining muscle while you're in this surplus, and that will only really get uncovered when you come back down. So what I say to most of my clients when they're in a gaining phase is about switching their focus to training performance. You shouldn't be focusing on your physique when you're in a gaining phase, because you're not going to really gain that much by overanalyzing your physique and making yourself feel worse about it. It's just going to make you want to diet more soon. And therefore, if you can switch your focus over to training performance and really just focus on progressing in the gym every session, the muscle gain and the physique will come later down the line. You don't need to worry about that now. It's all part of the process, and the results will show later down the line when you bring the body fat back off. So switching your focus to training performance is extremely important in my opinion, and it's what's going to make or break a gaining phase, because if you quit the gaining phase too soon, you re-enter a deficit, you're probably not going to make as much progress as if you were to stay in a surplus for a really long amount of time. So making sure you're switching your focus is extremely important in my opinion. To go along with that, really understanding your long-term goals can really help with your mindset and keeping your mindset on track during a surplus. Because if you know that you want to gain a certain amount of muscle or completely change your physique over the next 5 years, and you know you're going to have to stick to the plan to do that, if you can understand that the results will come in the long term, then it makes it a lot easier to live with the fact that you're going to look a bit worse in this gaining phase before you can uncover the muscle. So that's a very important thing as well, making sure that you're understanding your long-term goals and therefore sticking to the plan during the hard part where you're not looking your best. So next up, we have training, the fun part. So in my opinion, my biggest shift when it comes to these last 4 years has been how I've approached training. So in the past, I was working with a lot higher volume, a lot higher frequencies, training 6 times per week, and that led to my work being a lot less effective. So what I've really focused on over the last 4 years is prioritizing progression. So my primary focus within training over the last 4 years has all been based upon increasing mechanical tension over time. Mechanical tension is the primary driver for hypertrophy, and therefore by increasing mechanical tension, that's going to be your most effective method to gaining more muscle. So to increase the amount of mechanical tension that's being placed on a muscle, all you have to do is increase the amount of load you're lifting while maintaining your execution. If you're increasing the amount of load you're lifting, but your execution is getting worse, then your internal stimulus is going to be going down or staying the same. You want to be increasing the load that you're lifting while maintaining the execution, and therefore the internal stimulus is going up. So what I did was bring my training frequency down from 6 times per week to 5 times per week, and now I'm actually training 4 times per week. Alongside that, I brought my volume down as well. So the reason for doing that is to try and really get the most out of the least. So I'm doing a very small amount of work, but the work that I am doing is extremely effective. So even though my volume thresholds might be between 5 and 15 sets per muscle group, which is pretty low, the quality of that work is so much higher than it was before that I'm now seeing way more progress within my strength and within my physique because of that. So this doesn't mean that you need to train to all-out failure with every set. You can still train with slightly higher volume, but just make sure that volume is effective and high quality. Make sure the accuracy of those sets is really high. Make sure the execution is really good, and make sure the intensity is in a close proximity to failure. Those 3 things are the most important things when it comes to training. So make sure that you are getting the most out of the least and that all your work is effective work. You're not training with junk volume, because junk volume isn't going to provide you with much more stimulus. All it's going to do is provide you with more fatigue, a bigger recovery demand, and therefore you're probably not going to make as much progress if you're doing a lot of junk volume. Your biggest tools to make sure that you are increasing mechanical tension over time is firstly, logbooking your sessions. I'm sure a lot of you do this already, but making sure that you're logbooking your sessions and trying to beat logbook each week across the board, across all your lifts is very important. But also to make sure that your execution isn't getting worse over that time, I'd recommend also filming your sets, especially in your big compounds in which the execution is likely to get worse. I'd definitely be filming those sets on a weekly basis to make sure that the execution isn't getting worse over time. You might just be using more momentum, auxiliary muscle groups are getting involved, and therefore you're not getting the same amount of stimulus out of those sets. So film your sets and use your logbook as well, and you can't really go wrong. So nutrition, in my opinion, is pretty simple when it comes to a gaining phase. What you should be doing is trying to push up your food as high as possible while basically maintaining your required rate of gain. So you don't want to be pushing your food to a point at which you're gaining at a really quick rate, but you do want to make use of opportunities to push food up more. The reason for this is we have more energy availability to increase training performance, and it will also lead to a higher recovery capacity, and therefore you're more likely to progress within the gym at a quicker rate. Those are the 2 reasons as to why you want to push food high in a gaining phase, but also it provides you with more tools going into the next dieting phase. So if you can build your food up to a point at which it's very, very high, you'll then go into the next dieting phase with all that food to play with. So you can basically diet on higher food, making the next diet a lot more effective, and therefore in the long run, it's probably going to be easier to make more progress. There are definitely other things we can look at with regards to how I optimize my nutrition over this time. The biggest switch with regards to macros is that I went for a much higher carb approach. In the past, I'd basically just been tracking my protein and my calories, but over those 4 years, I gradually moved towards a higher carb approach. So what I did was basically have my protein at around 2 grams per pound of complete protein. I then had my fats at pretty much a minimum throughout, so between 40 and 50 grams for myself, and then the rest of my macronutrients were all based upon carbs. And that led to me having much higher training performance because I had so much available glycogen within my body that my performance was much higher, and therefore I found it a lot easier to progress than I did do in the past, where I might have been eating a lot less carbs today and a lot higher fats, and therefore my training performance wasn't quite as high. And if you want to maximize muscle growth, you want to make sure your training performance is in a really good spot. So I'd probably go for a higher carb approach if you are trying to maximize your performance within the gym. We can also look at minutiae with regards to meal timings, peri-workout nutrition, etc. But to be honest, that's going to depend a lot more on you as an individual. If you get more stressed out with dealing with the minutiae with regards to nutrition or training, then you're probably better off not thinking about the minutiae, because the amount of stress caused by trying to maximize all of those variables is probably going to cause more harm than good. So for me, I didn't mind trying to maximize every single thing. So I would have really strict meal timings, making sure my protein servings were around 0.4 gram per kilogram per meal, and then also making sure that my peri-workout nutrition was spot on. So basically having a lot of carbs pre, intra and post. But as I said, all of those variables are less important compared to your total calorie intake, your protein intake, and then also having a good amount of carbs throughout the day as well. So the final section of this video is going to be recovery. So that's why I got these bad boys out. Over the last 4 years, I've basically completely focused on my sleep to the greatest degree. I can't explain how much I've really focused on getting my sleep in a good spot. A lot of the research says you shouldn't be getting over 9 hours, but in my opinion, you should be getting as much sleep as you possibly can without it disrupting the following night's sleep. So if you're getting too much and therefore you're affecting your routine with getting to sleep the following night, then that's probably too much. But I'd get as much as you can at a high quality without it carrying forward and affecting the following day. So the biggest changes I've made to my sleep are firstly getting in a really good routine. So the time I go to bed and the moment I wake up are pretty much the same every single day. So what that does is basically regulate my circadian rhythm to the point at which my body knows when to release certain hormones, and therefore make sure my sleep is much more effective than it would be if I wasn't doing that. So at the moment, my sleep routine is pretty much the same every single day. So I'll put the blue light blockers on at around 7 PM. I'll have my final meal at around 8 PM. I'll get into bed at around 9 PM. And that way my body knows exactly what I'm doing, and it will release melatonin, and I feel really tired at around 10 PM, and therefore I fall asleep. pretty much the same time every day. So if you can get into a really good routine, that's going to have a massive impact on your sleep in terms of effectiveness, quality, and duration. And what that's going to do is basically improve your training performance, improve your appetite, and therefore really maximize your muscle growth throughout this phase. So really try and make sure you're sleeping in a good spot. Firstly, through routine, and secondly, making sure that you've got a really good sleep environment. So a really cold, dark room, trying to make it as cave-like as possible is basically the best environment to make sure that you're getting quality sleep. So yeah, that's pretty much the video done, guys. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope I've provided you with a bit of value with regards to how I built the muscle over the last 4 years, and hopefully you guys can do the same. So if you did enjoy this, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.